Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala Rasulullah. Yeah, I was asked to say a few words about coming to Islam, and I never get tired of talking about that. So, there are many ways to tell the story, of course, but I'll try to keep it short. Obviously, the bottom line is that the shortest and the most accurate answer is the mercy of Allah Azza wa Jal. Yeah, I've heard some say that you notice that all reverts said there's a dua involved somewhere along the way, and I can believe that's true. But then it gets back to the same thing, that it's from the mercy of Allah Azza wa Jal that the person's heart was even open to make dua. So, yeah, I mean, that's where the story begins and ends, is with the mercy of Allah Azza wa Jal. In my particular case, what I'm reminded of is the fact that we know that paradise lies at the feet of the mothers, and that certainly played a really pivotal role for me. Our mother, my brother and myself, our mother always served as this sort of background reminder that, well, I believe in something greater, and I believe and so on, some power greater than ourselves, etc. And that was sort of a counterbalance to our father's influence. He was a scientist, and he was one of the very top folk in his field. And at that time, the majority of Western scientists basically were either called themselves atheist or agnostic, and so on. And of course, it's true to this day for a lot of folks. So my mother was always there, sort of in the background, serving as that. And but my brother and I stumbled along in our lives. And then 35 years ago, I got it. My mother, we were separated we were living across the country from each other, but she had to have surgery, which I knew about, but that turned out to be way more emergent than was thought. And then I had a conversation in which the doctor was basically explaining, and I got it, was explaining that, well, I mean, got to do this as an emergency, and basically just don't expect her to survive. So and it was a peculiar situation because I myself had just finished my residency. It was just the next day scheduled due to my first case in private practice. And so for me, it was a mess. And I couldn't possibly get across the country to be with my mom, that kind of notice. So I just went to pieces. And of course, this is before smartphones and all that stuff. And but I literally, I could not get any peace, and I was trying to get some rest. I couldn't, and I was just a mess. I literally got my Rolodex out, or whatever it was back then, and called just about every friend that I knew, and basically cried on their shoulders over the phone, explained the situation. Many of those same people, to this day, they will ask about my mom in this conversation. But at any rate, that didn't work. I was still a mess, and I couldn't get to sleep. I couldn't get any peace. And finally, God knows how, I just, by the mercy of Allah Azza wa Jal, I don't know where it just happened. So I just prayed, and I said, "Oh God, if you save my mother and show me the right way to live, I'll take it." So He saved my mom. She survived, mashallah, tabarakallah. She received a lot of blood during the surgery, and but at any rate, yeah, mashallah, she survived, and things went on from there. And that certainly that was just a pivotal point in my life. Things then just gradually changed after that. For one thing, I knew the dua to make whenever I was facing some difficulty. It was not the last time I made that same dua. And I just stumbled ahead, and I was still doing moronic things, but at least one thing was leading to another. And and I started praying. I started praying regularly in the morning and in the evenings. And the heart of the prayer, I believe, was being asked to be shown the right way to live and to be guided right, basically, as being a salt the most Mustaqim. So, and somewhere along the line, I developed a desire to read the Bible. I thought it was a little odd that I'd never read the Bible. I'd studied a bunch of other religions as a younger man, in my teens or 20s, and Taoism, Hinduism, Buddhism, etc., etc., etc. But I'd never read the Bible, the fundamental text of Judaism and Christianity, right? And here I am growing up in the United States and everything, and I was wondering, well, that's kind of weird. So all my Christian friends and Jewish friends, so on and so forth, and I guess you just assume you know about the religion, but I haven't read the book. So, and for me, it's always been books. If I want to learn about something, I want to know what's the book to read. So eventually I did read the Bible, and that was a much stronger influence for me than I was expecting. And I believed in it. And I distinctly remember this. If somebody had asked me back then, oh, you're kidding, so you read the Bible? So listen, I don't want you to give me all the do's and don'ts. I don't want all the rules. Just give me the single most important rule. That actually was very clear to me. From the Old Testament, the New Testament was very clear. Do not, just don't, not for any reason, don't worship anything but me. So, and I believed in that. Matter of fact, I considered myself to be Jewish in the sense that I believed in the Old Testament, but the God of the Old Testament, the prophets of the Old Testament, and I considered myself to be Christian because I believed in the prophet of the New Testament, the God of the New Testament. I also saw certain issues with the Bible. There were certain things that I picked up on that were like, what's going on with that? But then somewhere along the line, as I was approaching the end of reading the Bible and saw the end in sight there, I decided that, well, I guess while I'm at it, I may as well learn something about that one other big religion out there. Meanwhile, I'm just praying and praying. And so I kind of made up my mind that as soon as I'm done with this, I'll find out something about that Islam thing. And so when I was done, I called up the only Muslim I knew, a surgeon that I'd worked with, and explained that I was going on vacation and I wanted something to read. And so I wondered if he could recommend a translation of Quran. And he wanted to know why. And I said, well, because I want to learn something about Islam. Well, why? Why do you want to do that, Steve? And I said, well, and he kind of played that game. Eventually he said, come over, let's have some coffee. So he gave me, may Allah reward him with the best. He explained to me something about Islam, answered some of my questions, and gave me what I wanted, an English translation of Quran. And off I went. And that wound up being a way more powerful experience than I expected. Plus, I think it was important for me, coming from the background of having read the Bible, there were certain things that at one point or another began to dawn on me in reading the translation of something of the meaning of the Quran. One was that in the Bible, there were two distinct kind of passages. One that I could imagine being written in something that you might call the language of God. And then there were these other passages that were almost kind of painfully obvious they're just written by men. And they're dealing with subjects that, why would I be interested? And I've heard Christians describe them as boring, so these passages. And one thing I noticed about the Quran was that it eventually dawned on me at some point during that vacation while I was reading in the evenings, it dawned on me that, wait, I'm only seeing the one kind of passage here, and I don't think I've seen that other one. And so then I started paying closer attention and trying to find the problem, if you will, with the Quran, trying to find the passages that seem to have just unnecessary information, and I couldn't. And there were other things I noticed that had to this day, it's a very, just beautiful memory for me. Then I went back to Samir and said, obviously now I want to know something about who's this guy, who's Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So again, he made some nice coffee and he answered some questions and blah, blah, blah. And then he gave me Martin Ling's book on the Sirah, which I think to this day, there are mistakes in it, but to this day, it's the most powerful book in the English language on the Sirah. And that had a very strong effect. So basically, yeah, Quran, and then at one level or another, just the incredible devotion of these people, of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, of his family, his wives, his companions, and how so much was accomplished by so few. That definitely hit me. So then people got kind of tired of my questions, and so I got forwarded to the local masjid, and I don't know if anybody knows Abdul Latif Sultan. Actually, his brother Muhammad Sultan was the imam there. So his brother was very patient with me. May Allah have mercy on him. He passed a few years ago, and he was very patient with me. He was skilled at dealing with Americans, and et cetera, et cetera. Then people got tired of all the other questions I was asking, so they referred me to some sheikh in D.C. I was living in Florida at the time. And then I had occasion to come to D.C. because there was a death in the family. So I came, and actually one of the first things I did was go downtown to the masjid on Embassy Row. And there was some Sudanese dude, some young man, who just kept sort of after me and wanted to know if I knew the pillars. Well, yeah, I know. Well, why don't you just, I think you want to become Muslim, why don't you become Muslim? So, okay, fine. And I had known in my heart that I was Muslim for some time, but I think I need a little push there. So anyway, that turned out to be Imam Majid. Back then, he'd only been in the country, this is about 30 years ago, he'd only been in the country for a very short period of time. And there's something about this symmetry I find really pleasing. Does anybody know how Imam Majid came to be in this country in the first place?
His father was sick.
Yes. So his father, as you know, was Mufti of Sudan, right? So his father developed renal failure. So then he did some testing in Sudan, and Imam Majid had a good match for his father. So he said, okay, Papa, let's go. So he was Imam Majid wanted to donate his kidney to a living-related donor to his father. So they came to the States together. Then the follow-up testing showed that they just weren't, the more sophisticated testing just showed they were not an adequate match. So, but I find it interesting that the man who took my shahada wound up here in the States through his love for his father, mashallah, tabarakallah, and I wound up taking my shahada in large measure. I mean, to me, I feel like mashallah, tabarakallah, through my love for my mother. So that's a beautiful part of the story for me. What else can I say? One thing that I feel was key or another thing that I feel was key, was the behavior of the people that I went to when I wanted to learn something about Islam. And really what it reminds me of is what I understand to be the middle word of the Quran, right? Which, as I understand, has many shades of meaning, but to be mild, to be subtle, to take care, to take your precautions, to do your research, to do your due diligence, and so on. This surgeon that I'd worked with, and I find this interesting too, we didn't particularly get along professionally, but he was the only Muslim I knew. But then he had somehow communicated to me to this day I don't remember how, during our professional relationship, that he was Muslim. And he was skilled at dealing with Americans. He knew how this thing worked for Americans. So he was kind of subtle, and he was skilled in his dealing with me. And then Abdul Latif's brother, Muhammad Sultan, may Allah have mercy on him, likewise, ditto. And so many Americans came to Islam through him, through Abdul Latif's brother. So mashallah, tabarakallah, may Allah reward him with this. And then Imam Majid, obviously, though he was a very young man at the time, but yeah, he knew his way around. So that was, and that to me, there's a lesson in that as far as for all of us as far as being here, right? And that is that that the most important thing is our behavior. That if one is just kind of subtle, which I did not used to be in dealing with my American colleagues, but if one is relatively subtle and just lets the behavior speak for itself, the response of Americans tend to be very much positive in my experience. So that's about what I got. So, the Sheikh asked about my brother. So, I think of the first person having followed me into Islam as being my oldest child, Ahmed. He eventually changed his name to Ahmed. Of course, he was born before I was Muslim, but he just started praying with me from the time he was 6 or 7, something like that, when I accepted Islam. Then about 6 months or something, well, my brother and I were having our normal conversation once a week, once every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. Hey, how's it going? How's the work? How's the family? How's this? How's that? Blah, blah, blah. So what's new for you? And I don't know, my brother said whatever he said. What's new for you, Steve? And I said, yeah, well, let's see. Yeah, there is something. Yeah, I became Muslim. And so I still remember there was silence on the phone. And then my brother said, Steve, you are too strange. So that was the end of that conversation. But a few weeks later, we were having another conversation and basically said, okay, so what is it you towelheads believe anyway? And so I told him a little bit, he asked some questions, and I sent him a translation and blah, blah. So I got the next laugh, I guess you could say, when about 6 months later he became Muslim. So that was not pleasing to our father. He was kind of irritated enough myself. Then it's just the two of us, so that was that. So the whole thing, I mean, disinheritance and all that stuff. But then about 14 years ago, I think it was, my parents actually wound up in their old age moving here, and they wound up spending their last years with us. And my father said this Shahada during his last years, and then he passed about 7 years ago, and Imam Majid led his janazah. And then my mother passed 3 years ago, and Allah have mercy on them. She also said the Shahada, and they both wanted to be buried as Muslims, and so Imam Majid conducted her janazah. So obviously I find all of that to be beautiful, that whole sequence of events and these symmetries. Yeah.
What was pivotal to help you give dawah to your parents?
Still remember my dad. Actually, so after I became Muslim, I made Hajj I've been Muslim about 8 months. So what do I know? But I go and make Hajj, I shave, and now I go see my parents. Dad was not particularly happy with my appearance, having become Muslim, etc., etc. I was not anticipating this, but I realized within about, I don't know, an hour or so being in the home, that, I think there's about a 50% chance here I'm going to be physically attacked, and I may need to find another place for the night. So, what I'm getting at is one question my dad asked me. So now it's like, okay, we've lost the sons, who cares? Now what about the grandchildren? So he basically, and I knew what he was doing, and I said, he basically was trying to get me to commit to, well, okay, so how are you going to handle the kids? And I hemmed and hawed and said this and that and the other. And I still remember the look of disgust on his face. And he said, so in other words, you're gonna be subtle. And I was like, well, yeah, Dad, that's pretty much my plan. You and et cetera. But didn't say anything. But again, it gets back to, well, you have the lataf, right? Now, I'm sure that my parents and anyone who witnessed a lot of this stuff would say, well, Abdullah, you were far from subtle. But tried to be, and yeah. And then just keep going, try to maintain relationships and so on and so forth, and send gifts. And so the message was delivered to both myself and my brother that my dad wanted no contact, right? So okay, fine, no contact. But then he had a medical emergency, and so of course he wouldn't reach out, but I got the message from my mother that, no, he'll never say it, but yes, he would prefer that you're here. So, yeah, that sort of thing, and things just loosened up, and kind of one thing after another from there. One thing I remember my dad said years later was that I was apologizing to him during a drive for having been pretty far less than the ideal son. And he was quiet for a while, and then he said, well, Steve, the most sincere, the sign of a sincere apology or sincere regret is change. And your mother and I have seen that. You know, and if that comes from Islam, hey, great. We'll take it any way we can get it. You know, so I guess all of that.
What was your background in terms of religion, your family religion, your beliefs?
My parents were both raised as Quaker, but they kind of taken Quakerism to its logical extreme in my view, and they just sort of walked away entirely. Yeah.
Did you believe in God before?
Did I believe in God? No, I remember a friend asking me in college a direct question, Steve, do you believe in God? And I said, no. So, that was then, yeah. And my father, I think at the time, would have said no. And my mother would have said yes.
Just a follow-up. If you didn't believe in God, then why did you pray when your mother was in that condition? Why did you pray to her?
Exactly. I mean, and that's why it's very hard to believe those who call themselves atheists that when the chips are really down, that they have not at one point or another prayed. Matter of fact, I heard these stories, of course. My poor daughter can attest to this. You hear the same stories over and over again from your parents, right? So I heard so many stories from World War II from my dad over and over again. Finally, it dawned on me one time with this very traumatizing mission that he flew in World War II, that finally it dawned on me to ask, hey Dad, at any point during this whole thing, did you pray? And he said, no, there was no time for that. Well, I mean, maybe I said, oh God, get me out of this. I was like, okay, got my answer. Yeah. So as for me, I don't, again, the mercy of Allah Azza. I mean, just when the chips were really down and I couldn't get any peace, and I tried everything I knew how to do, yeah, prayed, turned to Him.
What year did you accept Islam?
93. Alhamdulillah. جزاك الله خير. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.